Hello, welcome. So today we are going to be talking about delivery. So up until this point, this is what I'm assuming that you have done on any given speech. You have thought about your audience, you've determined your purpose, both the general and specific purpose. You've talked about your topic, you've come up with a thesis, you've developed your main points, you have an engaging introduction and conclusion, and you have full and complete transition sentences and optional visual aids. So at this point, when we talk about delivery, you have done all of that. So you have essentially written your speech in full on paper, and now it's time to start thinking about the different delivery aspects. So we're going to talk about the different components of delivery, as well as different delivery methods or delivery styles. So beginning with the components of delivery, there are verbal and nonverbal components. So we'll go through each one of them and talk about all of the individual elements that we need to be mindful of as we consider the verbal and nonverbal delivery components. So the first verbal component of delivery that we need to discuss is articulation. And articulation is how well we form our vowels and consonants using our lips, jaw, tongue, and palate to form the sounds that we identify as speech. We are often judged on how well we speak in general, and typically we perceive people as more prepared, credible, and effective when they articulate well. So articulation, maybe we've heard of this talked about as diction or enunciation. So it's the difference between saying going to and gonna. So we need to have good articulation in our speeches because we want our audience to be able to understand the words that we are saying. So similar to diction is pronunciation. So we should know the proper articulation applied to any given word, and that is what we consider the pronunciation. So we should know what syllables are emphasized, we should know how to say every single word in our speech, and this includes authors' names. So for most of our speeches, we have to include outside sources, and you're likely going to be saying someone's name as you're doing your verbal citation. You need to know how to pronounce their name. I always recommend if you, in practice and in your preparation, you've learned how to say someone's name or you've learned how to say a term correctly, and in the moment you forget, just make a strong choice and continue on with it. If you say anything with enough confidence, even if you're wrong, people may think, oh, hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're right about this because they're speaking about it with such authority. Obviously, that shouldn't be our first case scenario, but when in doubt, make a strong choice, but do your research and preparation in advance so that way you know how to say every word in your speech. The next thing to be mindful of is accent and dialect. Sometimes we'll call this regionalism, and that refers to the way we say certain syllables, kind of like our accents, right? Our dialects. So depending on your career, you may need to be a little fluid in the different accents and dialects that you speak. You should know your audience and if they're familiar with your dialect, because if they are not, then you may need to use more articulation, or you may just need to define terms that you use or phrases that you use, because it may not be a phrase that's familiar to your audience. Another thing to be aware of is vocal quality, and that is taking into account what we call the timbre, and that is the distinct sound and texture that your voice has. All of us have voices that are unique to us, and it depends on our body, our vocal cords, if we're feeling sick or not. All of those things can affect your vocal quality. So some words that we use to describe vocal quality might include warm or clear or soft and scratchy or mellow and breathy. So for this, it's just mindful to be aware of what kind of vocal quality do you have, and just make sure that your audience is able to hear and understand you, regardless of what your vocal quality is. So the next two ones are pitch, inflection, and also rate. So pitch is talking about the highness or the lowness of your voice. So each of us have a range of tone, and we are able to create certain frequencies of vocal sounds that are vibrations sent out from our vocal cords that resonate through the chambers of our body. Kind of similar to the way we think of music and audio frequencies. So pitch can be helpful in communicating what type of sentence is it. For example, we do something called uptalk at the end of a question, where we have the pitch of our voice go up at the end of a question to indicate that we are asking something. So for instance, you may say, "What are you having for breakfast today?" So that today goes up, but we have to be mindful. Sometimes we do this uptalk even when we are not asking questions. So we do this at the end of every sentence, regardless of what kind of question or sentence it is. And when we do this over and over again, it sounds like we're doubting ourselves or that we're questioning ourselves. So use uptalk sparingly and try to only use it when you're asking a question. We do want to have a good vocal variety with the different pitch patterns that we use in our sentences, because if we do not, this is when we get monotone. And I'm sure some of you have had teachers or professors or other people in your life who have spoken in a monotone, and it can be very difficult to listen to someone if they are speaking in monotone. And if our goal is to create a listenable speech, by avoiding monotone and by having pitch and inflection variety, we can avoid that, and we can create an interesting, engaging, and listenable speech to our audience. With rate, that is talking about the speed of which you are speaking. So almost thinking about it like tempo. If your tempo is too slow, if you're speaking too slow, it might sound a little boring, a little low energy. It also may sound like you're unprepared and you're trying to think of what you're saying as you are saying it, or you forgot what you were planning on saying. But on the other end, if you speak too quickly, the audience might get the impression that you're just trying to get it over with and you don't want to be there, or that you're nervous, or the audience may just have a difficult time catching up and comprehending what you are saying. Your audience needs time to digest information, so plan on having pauses in your speech. And speaking of, pauses are really helpful. Some of your audience members may not be the best at understanding information through verbal means. Some of us are better at learning information through reading or through experiencing it. So we need to provide some pauses for our audience to catch up on what we're saying and to allow information to settle in their minds before moving on to a new idea. So pauses, really helpful if they are intentional and if they are after a thought or an idea. Pauses that are in the middle of a thought or an idea or a sentence can make your delivery feel choppy and unprepared and kind of jolting to your audience. So use pauses, but make sure that they don't interrupt the flow of your ideas, your thoughts, and your sentences. We also need to be mindful of vocal pauses, because generally spoken sentences need to be shorter and simpler than what we could comprehend by reading. So pauses can increase comprehension. However, we need to avoid what we call vocalized pauses, and we've talked about this before as verbal fillers. So words like like, etc. We also can think of them as vocalized pauses, and they commonly occur when we're gathering our thoughts and we instinctively try to fill that silence. When overused, they can be distracting and they can give the impression of a lack of preparation. The next component of verbal delivery is volume and projection. So with volume, you want to make sure that you are developing and supporting your voice with good breath control and energy. You also mostly want to make sure that your audience can hear you. So your volume and projection should be dependent on the size of your audience, on any sort of audio equipment you may be using, like a microphone. And also you should think about the age as well. If you're speaking to an older audience, you may need to speak louder than if you're speaking to a room full of high schoolers. So we want to make sure that our audience can hear us. And lastly, we just want to have a sense of vocal variety with our verbal components of delivery. We want to have a variety of pitch. We want to have a variety of speaking rates, and we want to have a variety of volume. That's going to create interest and make our speech much more listenable to our audience. And remember, that is our goal. A listenable goal is the speech, or excuse me, a listenable speech is the goal, so close. So we need to have variety. If on your feedback of your speeches, if I ever put lacking vocal variety, it's because you don't have enough change in your pitch, volume, and or rate. So those are kind of the big three that I think about. All of the other ones are important as well, though. So now let's talk about the nonverbal aspects of delivery, beginning with personal appearance. So the golden rule with personal appearance is dress appropriately for the situation. The second golden rule, because there can be two, I just decided, with personal appearance is that you should err on the side of more formal than more casual. So you should be mindful of your audience, of the setting, of the context, of the dress code itself. If it makes sense, then that's okay. So for example, if a student is giving a speech at 9 a.m., kind of an early class, and they arrive in their pajamas to give their speech. At first thought, you may think, oh, they slept in, they barely made it to their speech, maybe they don't care. But the speech could end up being on sleep deprivation, in which sense the delivery of the external appearance of his clothing, of his personal appearance, was intentional and contributed to the speech. So that's the exception for that. When in doubt, business casual or whatever the dress code is what you should aim for with personal appearance. The other thing is making sure that your face is open and visible to your audience. So if you have longer hair, make sure that it doesn't fall into your face, pin it back, push it back, wear a headband. You want to be able to make sure that you can make eye contact with your audience. So the next component of nonverbal delivery is movement and gestures. So body stance, gestures, facial expressions, all of this we can think of as body language. And you want your movement to be relaxed and natural and not excessive. And that takes practice. What I recommend, if you haven't already, is filming yourself as you are speaking and going around, or rather going back and watching the video and see, what does my body look like when I am speaking? Am I a swayer? Am I a pacer? Am I a stand on one, hand on the hip, body weight on one side? So when in doubt, we want to have a strong, even stance, feet shoulder width apart, our weight equally distributed on both legs. And we want to make sure that we are facing the audience. Hand gestures, I think, can be really effective, especially if we're doing extemporaneous delivery. Having natural hand gestures can actually make your speech feel more conversational, but you want to make sure that you're not doing distracting gestures, like playing with your index cards or hitting your leg or putting your hand in your pocket. Stay open, stay strong, and stay confident with your body. For facial expressions, I think facial expressions are so crucial for public speaking because you can really communicate what you want your audience to feel and understand from your speech with your face. You also want to communicate that you are interested and you are passionate about your speech, because if you are not, and your face looks dead to the world, like you don't want to be there, you can't expect your audience to be interested in your speech if it looks like you yourself are not interested in your speech. It can also help with your credibility. If you are really engaged and passionate about your speech, that's going to make sense to your audience, and that's going to translate really well to them. And the last thing is eye contact. So eye contact is so important because it solidifies the relationship between the speaker and the audience. And it takes practice. The best practice is to be able to scan the audience, making each member feel and believe like the speaker is speaking to them. If you ever do online, virtual, recorded speeches, eye contact might look a little bit different. So instead of making eye contact with the audience, if you're recording your speech or using a video chat tool like Zoom or Skype, you want to make sure that you are looking into the camera. It's going to be really tempting to be looking at yourself in the side of the screen, but as much as you're able to, still look at the camera, because that's going to be the closest thing that we can get to looking at our audience in the eyes. So that is all of the different verbal and nonverbal components of delivery. Now let's talk about the different methods of delivery. So this is different delivery speaking styles. We have 4 different styles. The first is extemporaneous, and this is one that we have talked about before. This is the one that we're doing for most of our speeches. With extemporaneous style, it's not completely written out. It's usually delivered with keynotes or index cards or speaker notes, but it is carefully prepared and rehearsed. But it should still feel conversational and fluid. You're not fumbling for words, you're not rambling, you're very aware of timing, and that is carefully monitored, but there's a little bit of flexibility. So if you want to reference the immediate surroundings, reference a previous speech from earlier in the speech day, the news of the day, so on, you have that flexibility to do so. With this type of speech, you're going to want to aim for minimum 80% eye contact with your audience, whether they're in person or virtual, and 20% of your time looking at your notes. Ideally, you want to practice so you're only looking at your notes 5% of the time, but you can get away with 20%. All right, the next style of method delivery that we have is called manuscript. And so the clue is in the word script. This speech is written and the speaker reads it word for word to the audience. And while the manuscript style is pretty common today, it was originally handwritten on paper manuscripts, and now we use more teleprompters or typed out papers for this. Oftentimes it's used for newscasters, presidents, political figures, and it's important when you have to be really precise with your words, with your timing, whatever it may be. In the news reporting industry, every fraction of a second counts because broadcast time is costly. Time is literally money in that sense. Also, you need to know the facts and the names. They need to be exact and accurate, so there's no room for error, because if there's errors in reporting, that's going to decrease the credibility of not only the newscaster, but the news organization. The next method of delivery style that we have is memorized, and this is where the speech is written out in full, but it's committed to memory and recited to the audience verbatim, word for word. So this is some kind of common. Oftentimes it's used in acting. So actors on stage need to memorize the script of the play and perform it word for word. Also, some high school and university speech and debate teams will memorize their competitive speeches. When you do this, you have a lot more freedom. You're not tied to a podium or index cards, so you can have more eye contact with the audience as well. And the last type of speech that we have is an impromptu speech. And impromptu speeches are made up on the spot. They are unprepared and unrehearsed. So some examples might be like giving a toast at a wedding, saying grace before a meal, an acknowledgement, offering thanks, whatever it may be. They're generally short and given with little or no notice. So I find that in our day-to-day lives, impromptu speaking is usually what we do the most, especially if we think about job interviews. You may have a sense of the type of questions they may ask you in a job interview, but it's likely that you won't know exactly what they will ask you. So when they do ask you questions in the interview, you have to come up with an answer right then and there. So it is definitely perhaps more stressful to some of us because we don't have that preparation time. So you're really coming up with things and speaking them all at the same time. So it's quite a quick process, and it tends to be a bit more informal in that sense. So with that, we have covered the verbal and nonverbal components of delivery, as well as the different delivery styles. Thank you for listening, all.